Bill Blair is Canada's Minister of Border Security. He's with me now. Bill Blair, good to see you. Thanks for coming in to speak with me again. It's always good to have you here, and we have lots to talk about. Talk a little bit about some of the questions around cannabis legalization. Sure. Then we'll talk about what's happening at the border with asylum seekers, and you got your hands full with that too as well. So lots to cover in the brief time we have together today, but thanks for stopping by. So we have U.S. border authorities sending out very clear signals that there could be some challenges for Canadians who work in what will be the legal cannabis industry next month when they arrive at the border, and in some cases they could be detained, they could be banned for life from crossing into the U.S. because they work in an industry in Canada that's going to be legal, but the Americans may still view it as trafficking in controlled substance. What are you doing to fix that?
Well, one of the things the Americans have told us is that they don't anticipate any change in the way in which they'll manage their border, the questions that they'll ask. And I think the past is a prologue here. We've got over 5 years of a licensed medical or marijuana production industry that's been operating in this country. It employs tens of thousands of Canadians, and frankly Canadians and globally. People have invested hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions of dollars in that new industry. And so what we have seen in that last 5 years is Canadians involved in that industry have not experienced, difficulties at the border, and I think that the few exceptions are individuals who've gone and disclosed to the border security people of their intent to go down and engage in the marijuana business in the United States. And the United States has every right as a sovereign country to say no to anybody coming into their country, but there are ways in which we can manage that.
But what does that mean, though, when you say going down to engage in the marijuana? Well, in some cases, we've heard stories of Canadian business people are going down to look at equipment to buy as part of the of producing cannabis legally in this country, and that red flags them at the border. And
I think there's no difficulty for the fact that they're involved in a legitimate, legal, well-regulated industry in this country. But if they're going into the United States to engage in a business activity which the U.S. government sees as unlawful, then they're going to have to answer a lot of questions about that.
So what do you say if you're going down to look at purchasing equipment to help run a cannabis production? Are you supposed to say?
I think it's very important to say that you are conducting your business in Canada and it's a legal, regulated business, as opposed to activities that may be taking place in the United States, which the Americans might be concerned would be unlawful in their jurisdiction. But I would also remind, again, Canadians, we've got over 4 million Canadians who have admitted that they've used cannabis, including some very prominent individuals. We've got some very well-known public figures who are involved in the marijuana business, who are regularly and routinely going back and forth across that border every day, hundreds of thousands of people.
It might only because they haven't been asked the question, what do you do for a living?
Well,
if you say I work in the...
And in my conversations, in our conversations, and Mr. Goodall's conversations with our counterparts in the United States, they said that they do not anticipate any change in the way in which they'll manage their border security issues. And so we take them at their word, and we'll monitor very carefully. My advice is always to Canadians who are being asked by a law enforcement official at the border on either side, going in either direction, to answer their questions truthfully. And I think it's really important for every Canadian to understand, under no circumstances will it be lawful. It's a serious criminal offense to transport cannabis from Canada into the U.S. or from the U.S. into Canada. And Canadians need to be mindful that there is a significant criminal liability in crossing that border. And so when you present yourself at the border, a strong smell of cannabis, an indication of the recent use of cannabis is going to draw the attention of border security officers on both sides of the border.
But people are concerned about how those working in the legal cannabis industry in this country might be affected at the border. What they're saying to you is, look, go a step further. We've heard what the statement is from the U.S. border agencies, and that has raised some alarms for people here in Canada. They want you to go have that discussion with them and have them issue a policy directive to, in fact, reinforce that, to say if someone's working in the legal cannabis industry in this country, that's no reason to stop them from entering the United States. Because the concern is that if there's something they don't like about you, they'll ask the cannabis question. If they happen to get the answer they don't like, you can be banned for life.
And again, Peter, we've had the conversation with the Americans. They've indicated that they don't anticipate any change in the way in which they manage their border. It's important to keep in mind it's a sovereign country, as are we. We cannot dictate and tell the United States or any other country how they should manage their border. We do this very reciprocally and collaboratively between us. That shared border between our two countries and the economic and human activity that goes back and forth across that border every day is something that we've worked well together for a very long time. I understand that there's a certain anxiety, but again, let's look at the experience that we have had over the past 5 years. Well, we've had a medical marijuana regime in this country where a significant number of Canadians have been able to access cannabis legally through the medical regime, and a significant number of Canadians are employed in that industry or invested in that industry as it has existed since 2013. And they have not had substantial problems at the border. The Americans are saying they're not changing the way in which they intend to manage that. Okay. So we'll take them at their word and continue to monitor the situation carefully. But I don't think it's appropriate to attempt to dictate to the Americans how they would manage their border, nor do they dictate to us how we do it. We work on these things together. It has worked very well in the past. My expectation is it will continue to work. And if Canadians start to experience difficulties, then we perhaps can escalate the conversation. We want to make sure that the Americans are clearly aware of the new legal regime, the strict regulatory framework that we've put in place for the production and distribution of cannabis in this country. Quite frankly, I believe it's far more effective than the criminal prohibition that previously existed in Canada, or will exist up until October 17th. And I think there are opportunities to demonstrate that we're managing this in a very responsible way.
Let's talk about the other big issue on your plate, and that's the issue of asylum seekers. And we saw the numbers went up a little bit from August to July, but they're down from summer to summer. It's been described as a crisis. You've got your hands in it now, trying to deal with it.
I've managed a few crises in my time in previous jobs,
I know you have.
And I know the difference between something that needs to be worked on and what would otherwise be described as a crisis.
How long I think what Canadians want to know is, how long is this going to go on? How long are hundreds of or several hundreds of people a month going to pour across the Canadian border?
Well, first of all, they're not pouring.
Okay.
As they present themselves at the border, they're immediately met by the RCMP, who do exhaustive security background checks to ensure that there's no criminality, no threat to the security of the country. They are then processed. If they make application for asylum in this country, they are entitled under international protocols, but also Canadian law, to due process. And so we bring them right into that process. And we are a compassionate, welcoming country, but at the same time, if someone is not eligible to stay as a refugee, they are subject to removal.
Right, but are you okay with it? Do you want this to continue?
Well, I believe that it's incumbent upon us to do our very best to manage it. Let me share with you some of the things that we've done.
I understand managing it, but I'm asking is, do you want it to continue, or do you want it to stop?
You know, I think Canadians do understand that we are a country that is welcoming and accepting of legitimate refugees, those who are fleeing persecution and risk from other parts of the world. But we have an appropriate process to that.
Well, I understand.
It isn't working as efficiently as it needs to be.
But you're managing an issue. You're managing a problem that you'd rather not have. Isn't that fair?
Well,
and so how do you solve the problem?
And we are doing that. We've gone into the United States. We've gone to other countries. We've done a lot of outreach into potential immigrant communities and refugee communities to let them know that we have a rules-based system, that there is due process. But if you are not eligible, you are subject to removal.
Is it working?
Well, in fact, it is working. But it needs to work more efficiently. And frankly, that's one of the things that I am working on, to improve the efficiency of IRB processes, so that when people make that application, they are entitled to due process, but due process must take place in an efficient way. We want a system that is fair, fast, and final. And that's what we're building in this country. We are also communicating to communities so that they have a clear understanding of what the rules are in Canada, and that asylum application is no free pass to permanent residency. People need to understand that. And I've reached out to Secretary Nielsen in the United States and asked her to formally engage with us in a discussion about improving and enhancing the Safe Third Country Agreement.
That's the
agreement. Every indication is that they are quite prepared to meet with us to discuss how we might work to the mutual benefit of both countries to manage that issue more effectively for both countries.
All right, Bill Blair, thanks again for your time today. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Peter.